Welcome to this episode of Elevate Your Wealth, and today I am joined by a rising star, commercial lawyer, one of the best I know, and I've worked with her, and she has also been a client as well, which has been amazing. And today we're joined by Natalie Melia. So welcome to the show, Natalie.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you for having me.
Not a problem. Not a problem. Definitely happy to have you on here. So today we're going to be talking about business succession planning, so I think that's a very key topic for every business owner. You need to think about it, and then you definitely need to put something in place, and you need some good contracts around that. So that's why we have Natalie here to tell us a lot about that. So before we dive into business succession planning, Natalie, what's your story? Tell us a little bit about yourself, hobbies, anything.
Yeah, okay, great. So I'm a commercial lawyer. I've been at Business Depot Legal now for just over 5 years. I grew up in the UK, studied in the UK, and I actually moved to Australia by accident. Oh. So I came backpacking like most, most British people do, but just never got on the plane to go back home. I mean, the weather I was attracted to, but also just the opportunity in Australia.
Yeah.
I find it quite inspirational that there's so much opportunity in business in Australia compared to in the UK. So by that, I mean, there's so much innovation. There's a lot more startups. I think there's more mentality around business and business opportunity in Australia that really attracted me to that. And that's why I'm a commercial lawyer. I'm really drawn to business opportunity. How can you help people be successful in business? And what really drives people to do that is to plan for their future and be successful and plan for your future and your family. I have 2 young kids myself, so I'm a busy young mum, a 1-year-old.
Super mom, just by the way.
1-year-old and 2-year-old. So some people will say crazy, but I love it regardless. And yeah, that's a little bit about me in the background.
Nice. So welcome. Glad you stayed in Australia. Australia is an amazing place. So weather and everything, it just works wonders. So tell us a little bit about this rising star thing you just told me about before we started. Tell me.
So we were just discussing that best lawyers call out for nominations every year, and I've just been nominated as a rising star in commercial law. So something to look out for in the next few months.
Yeah. Congrats on that. I think that's a huge achievement. So
thank you.
Congrats. I've seen your work firsthand, and I think it's amazing. And you just go get it. You just get shit done. So
that's exactly right.
Good. Okay. So can we start by you just explaining about business succession planning, why it is crucial for business owners?
Yeah, it's really important, and it's something that often gets overlooked, I think. When people think about protecting their assets and protecting their future, a lot of people know that to protect my home, to protect my personal assets, that they should get a will. If they're a business owner, they often don't think the same. But I like to think of it as you need to think about a will for your business. No. So protecting the future of your business. And it really is overlooked, particularly with those startup companies when perhaps they don't have the capital to invest in getting a lawyer or get a document drawn up in the first instance. So thinking about where your business is going and not just thinking in the next 12 months, thinking 10 years down the track, and what does that look like? So for yourself, Victor, for example, you're thinking, how do I step away from this business in 10 years' time? How do I provide for my family? How do I provide for my future? And what does that look like? And being a key person in the business, how do you step away? And what does that look like? It's also important as well to protect the value of your business. So you create something, and then what happens if you don't plan for the future? The business that you've grown and built all this value, put all this time and effort into, you don't want to lose that and lose the value in the business.
And that's amazing, because people think about just the business and making it run smoothly and making it just do what it's meant to do, but they forget about the value, because for most business owners, that is the biggest asset.
It is their biggest asset, and it's the most important thing that we're thinking of. The goal is ultimately usually to sell the business for a profit in the future. But if we don't effectively plan for that and think about the background of that, we get tied down in the numbers. So the day-to-day, let's make the profit. What's our profit goal for the next 12 months? But let's take a step back and unpack what we need to do to make sure that profit is protected.
Yeah. And one thing about business succession planning, the very key aspects, there's the financial aspect, there's the legal aspect as well. Obviously, we help with the financial aspect, and people need to know about the CGT concessions they can, actually take advantage of because it makes a huge difference down the track. But if they don't have the right legal structures in place, all that doesn't really matter. So glad we can definitely dive into that and talk a little bit more. So what is the difference between voluntary and involuntary succession planning? Can you give us a few examples or triggers or just anything you've seen before now?
Yeah, so a good example, and it's a little morbid, I guess, but if someone passes in the business, so a business owner passes, for example, and they don't have what we call a shareholders agreement in place that covers off what happens if a business owner dies, if a major shareholder dies in a business without documentation in place to say what happens to their shares upon their death, what happens with the transfer of them, what's the price, who are they going to go to. It can become quite messy. Particularly if you're a key person in the business. So for yourself, Victor, heaven forbid you get knocked down by a boss.
Not yet.
Where are those shares going? Your business can't operate without you. Or is the person that's passing, that your shares are passing to under your will, for example, do you want them running your business? Because they're two separate things.
Correct.
I use the example of husband and wife. If I was to pass, for example, in a law firm position, my partner who's not a lawyer stepping in and running a law firm wouldn't work. So it's really important to think about those things. So the involuntary triggers can be things like usually death will trigger an involuntary transfer. Other things to think about are family law provisions. I'm not a family lawyer, but what happens if you get divorced and then the shares become the subject of a family law transaction? That's why it's really important to do voluntary business succession planning and thinking about that. So really thinking about those triggers. I really encourage clients to think about circumstances such as what happens if your business partner suddenly decides to become a criminal and runs off with money from the business. And you think, that won't happen to me. He's my best mate. I run the business with him. It does happen, and I've seen it happen. So it's really important to be thinking about those sort of things. It's sort of a coverall and a catch-all to make sure that happens. It also happens as well where we might be running a business, you decide you don't like me anymore, you want to go and do something else, or you might want to set up a competing business with me. What happens in those circumstances? And if you really don't have the agreement in place to deal with that, it can be problematic. Again, thinking about value. If you go off and start a competing business with me, and I don't have any protection in place, I've just lost all the value in the business.
Correct.
Which was pointless. Why did we do that?
Yeah, why do we?
Why did we just spend the past 5 years creating a business for you to just go and take all the value away?
Correct, yeah. Especially because people, when they set up a business together, have different skills. And if you brought the skills of putting the systems in place and I brought the clients and then I leave because now I know about the systems, it's like, well, you are losing a lot in that
You're
regard.
losing a lot. And it's often something that's really overlooked is thinking about that and thinking about those protections. Particularly, like you say, it's all in the value. So losing a major shareholder or losing even a minority shareholder who has the knowledge or perhaps some confidential information that they could take away can really damage your business.
True. I actually really love the way you put it. It's a wheel for your business.
That's right.
Because you should have a wheel for your business. What do you want done? And,
what happens if something happens to you? And it's not a will, we think of death, but it's beyond death as well. We're thinking about all circumstances here. So really thinking about how you depart from your business or what happens if your business partner wants to depart from the business. You might not want them to leave. That might be the scenario. They might have a key skill that's fundamental to your business. And if they leave, the business is going to crash. So we really need to think about those things.
Yeah. So in terms of voluntary succession planning, what steps should business owners take to ensure a smooth transition? Are there a few things that, someone listening now that hasn't thought about this and is like, well, my business needs a will. What should they do next? What are a few key things that should get done?
Yeah, so absolutely. So the first step is definitely reach out to a commercial lawyer and think about talking about a shareholders agreement, also known as a partner agreement.
Okay.
Really thinking about that. So what a shareholders agreement does is it sets up your goals and how the business is going to run and what happens in certain scenarios for the next the life of the business essentially. So it's really important because it does often protect you from disputes. So it'll cover you for situations that may arise. So if we go back to the example of you want to go off and leave the business, start your own business, we're talking about protecting, maybe there's going to be a restraint to prevent you from setting a competing business.
Yeah.
Maybe we're looking at what happens if you want to sell your shares. What does that look like in terms of who can buy them? For what price?
Yeah.
Or in the example of you've just run away from my business and taken heaps of money and you're going to be fraudulent. How do I kick you out of the business without it impacting people? So it really is thinking about those little intricacies that really protect not only the value of the business, but they prevent disputes. They also avoid costs in the future. So if we think about a scenario where potentially you're in dispute with someone, the historical situation where you may need to engage a litigation lawyer, go down the path of obtaining court orders, it's expensive.
Yeah.
So it's expensive, it's time consuming, it's not good for your mental health. I think it's really important to try to do everything you can to avoid that.
Yeah.
And a little bit of cost at the beginning is saving you a lot of cost in the future.
True. Because I think many business owners will think, I don't want to spend this on the business now. But if you don't spend it now, you end up paying a lot more later on.
Yeah.
So just putting the key things in place now will really help you down the track. And I guess it helps from a planning perspective, because then you think about, okay, what would I actually want in 10 years?
Yes.
Should I still be working? Should I be transitioning out? All those are key things that would trigger, insight by the time they sit down with you.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think often as well, having those conversations early on with your business partners. So at the very start, if you sit down and talk about these things and you discover that your values aren't aligned, maybe you shouldn't be going into business together. Correct. And it can actually prevent you a whole lot of heartache and headache by sitting down and having those conversations early. So if your goals aren't going to be aligned or you can't agree on something major, for example, the direction of the business or what happens if one of you wants to sell the shares or exit, if you can't agree on those fundamental things, then it probably might be a red flag for you to reconsider what direction you take the business in.
Yeah. Even in that case as well, you might just think about transitioning one person out. It's like, okay, look, I want to grow this a lot more. You don't want to grow that. In 5 years' time, I buy you out. Something like that.
Yeah, exactly
actually coming up with a plan.
Yeah, coming up with that plan, and it really, really does just stop those disputes. And also coming up with the plan about what that looks like in a dollar sense. So, how are we going to value that in 5 years' time? Are we going to get a valuation? Do we have an agreed amount that we want to value it on? Is it a valuation less a discount? Really thinking about what you want to achieve now can save those problems later on. So if it's prescribed in a document, there's going to be no argument. You can't go back on the document.
Correct.
You're not going to get into a dispute scenario where you just can't agree on the dollar value of the shares. And you end up in this deadlock situation where no one can make a decision. And then you're both just stuck working in a business, unhappy, and neither of you are exiting. That's also damaging the business to the point where you may not be able to continue. And then you lose all that hard-earned value that you've created.
Yeah. And the good thing about planning ahead as well, because if you lose a key person, the value of the business drops.
Exactly.
Most people don't really think about that. So it's like, well, if we were in business and you were trying to transition me out, within that transition period, there should be someone replacing me. So the value of the business doesn't drop when you pay me out and you keep a big chunk as well. So those are key things in terms of planning. I think one of the things about voluntary succession planning as well, people think about it sometimes as just at the end, but things can happen in the middle. And one thing we help from a financial planning perspective is taking advantage of the concessional small business CGT benefits. So the 15-year rule, the retirement exemption, or the rollover can help someone transitioning out 5 years down the track so they don't pay too much taxes. And that really helps that person as well, just have a better value and, take something from something they have created, or rather take good value from something they've created over time.
Absolutely. And that advice is really critical, because at the end of the day, again, we're thinking future-proofing ourselves, and business owners don't think about that or don't know about those things that are available to them to really help them down the track. So it's always our advice as well to engage a financial planner, talk to them about these things now, because if we have this in place now, you really, again, the ultimate goal is to make money, right? Let's
Correct.
think about how we can do that.
Yeah. And I know sometimes people think about making money as bad. It's like, well, no, you can make money and have a purpose around that. You can make the world a better place.
Exactly
So there's
right.
nothing wrong in actually getting a good value for what you have created. Just talking about the shareholder agreement or any other contracts which you put in place for clients. How does that play a part? Will I say now and down the track? Is this something set up now and you can revisit every year and then tweak it, or is something set up and it's like, no, we're not changing that for the next 5 years? How does it actually work?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's good to have something in place that really covers off the business plan, but ultimately things may change and you can revisit and amend that agreement. There's nothing to stop you doing that.
Okay.
But if you have nothing in place, you've not got a fallback position.
Yeah.
So we always say shareholders agreements are often reviewed when there's major changes in the business. And that might be something like you bring in a new investor or someone does leave the business. Circumstances may change. You may have someone appointed as a director along the way. Those are trigger points really to think and look at your shareholders agreement and review what you've got in place. Is that still what you want in place? Is it a conversation that you need to sit down and have? And remembering as well, you won't be able to amend your shareholders agreement without everyone's agreement. That's a unanimous decision. So
you can't just say, no, I'm changing this.
so it's really to protect, and it's also important for those that are minority shareholders as well. So thinking about people who are perhaps investors and maybe they hold, 2 or 3% of the business, but they also are crucial, and it's also important that we protect them and that they have those protections in place. So if you're investing in a business, you want to know that shareholders agreement's in place as well, because that protects you as an investor.
And I think for majority shareholders who kind of make strategic decisions and they might not want to be slowed down by the minority shareholders, because generally minority shareholders are just investing because they believe in that person. Okay, so I know in one of our previous workshops you talked about the tag along and drag along tax rules.
Yes.
So how does that work if a major shareholder wants to still make decisions and wants the minority shareholders to kind of come along with them? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's really important for majority shareholders, I guess, to think about two things. So one thing is decision making. So we don't want, as majority shareholders often, for those minority shareholders to have a say in the day-to-day of the business.
Correct.
So we need to have a prescribed mechanism for how decisions will be made. And that's what's done in the shareholders agreement. So often there are things at law that a minority shareholder should be able to vote on. So things might be winding up the company.
Okay.
There's usually a prescribed small amount of things that a minority shareholder can vote on. If we don't have it set out in the shareholders agreement what can be voted on at what level, it can be problematic, because then we do have this situation where everyone wants to have a say in the business, really slows down decision making.
Correct.
Particularly if you're in a fast-paced environment. Think about construction businesses, property businesses, like real estate's a good one. Like decisions have to be made quickly. And if you're slowed down by your minority shareholders, that's not great.
Correct.
On the other flip side, your minority shareholders, when they're looking at a shareholders agreement, they want to know that they can have a say in the key things.
Yeah.
They understand that, we don't have a say in the day-to-day, but they want to know, I've got a say somewhere. I've got a seat at the table if I need to be there.
Exactly.
They only want to know at the end of the day, what am I getting?
Care of, and they feel involved.
Yeah, they feel involved, but also like my money's protected, and I get a say in whether I get that money out and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think and it's very key, because then both parties are happy. I always talk about, even if you're doing such, even if you're going into business with a family member, still get their arrangements in place, put it in place so it's nice and clear and everyone feels happy about it.
Well, they're probably the worst ones. You should definitely get a shareholders agreement if you're going into business with family.
That's true. So I guess just pivoting into involuntary business succession planning now. So are there any legal mechanisms that someone should have in place? For example, if someone was incapacitated in I'll just say partnership, what documents should they have to ensure that they can still take out some value and at the same time not disadvantage the the business, because from a financial planning perspective, what we do is ensure that both parties have protection. Okay. So from a life insurance and total and permanent disability. So if we're in business and something happens to me, obviously my value might not be present again, but I want to take some money out because I've worked X years and you want to still keep the business running. From a legal perspective, what do we need?
Yeah, so we call that a buy-sell deed.
Okay.
So what that is a document that really covers off that scenario. So you can't work, right? What happens is that it allows you to take some value out of the business, and it also allows for that sometimes and often a transition period so that I can buy out your shares. We've got a scenario and it's prescribed as to what that looks like.
Yeah.
You know what that looks like. I know what that looks like. We're all comfortable. And it also prevents that scenario I was talking about earlier where we have perhaps a wife or a partner, husband coming into the business, taking over and making a mess of things.
Correct. Yeah. We don't want that. Yeah. I think recently I wrote in the book as well that you might love your partner's wife because you're great, they help around, but they don't have that intellectual skill.
No.
So you definitely don't want to work with them.
Yeah, often business and relationships sit separate. And often family business does work, but if that's not the case and your partner isn't even in that industry, they are so unhelpful in that scenario.
Very. You're better off just paying them out.
That's exactly right.
Okay. So can you share any real world example where proper succession planning made a difference, either voluntary or involuntary as well?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I can give some examples of where it's gone wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Let's do that. I think.
And why you should get
correct,
voluntary succession planning.
Because most people will come to you when it goes wrong,
That's exactly right.
So which is not ideal. You want to come before anything happens and when it goes wrong, if it goes wrong.
Yeah. And touching back to what I said before, so if you don't plan now, what happens is people often engage a lawyer when things go wrong.
Yeah.
And it's more expensive.
Yeah.
It's more of a headache for them. And what, may have been a couple of $1,000s in the first instance turns into tens of thousands of dollars in resolving a dispute. So an example I can give you is a company starts up, best friends, they make a lot of money during COVID.
Okay.
Lots of money. They don't have a shareholders agreement in place. They
Because they're best mates.
Best mates for a startup. It's also not on people's radar that that's something that they should do.
True. Lack of knowledge.
Yeah, lack of knowledge. Yeah. There's not really something out there to educate people on that. So they go into business and just by chance, they happen to make millions of dollars, which is the dream, right? One of the business owners goes off and has some personal circumstances and starts taking money from the company to fund some personal habits. What happens is that that's actually damaging the business from a financial perspective, but it's also damaging the reputation of the business. Now, obviously we can get rid of him as an employee of the business because we have an employment agreement in place, which most people know to do.
Okay, yeah.
But
did this actual friends have an employment arrangement in place?
They
okay,
did.
Good,
yes,
good.
they did. Surprisingly.
The one thing.
Yeah. But what happened was that they couldn't actually remove the second party as a shareholder because they didn't have that shareholder agreement in place. So what they had to do was think about how do we get rid of this guy from the business? Otherwise, he's sitting there as a shareholder, getting his dividends, making money, but not actually contributing and not actually providing anything to the business. So it's a case of having to buy him out. But why would he want to be bought out if he's making passive income from a business that's successful?
Correct.
So it's a very convoluted process to try and then do that. And it's really going into the deep dives of all the legislations and how can we think about getting him out and being a bit more creative. If we'd had a shareholders agreement, there's a clause in there as standard. It would say, if you do anything fraudulent, you bring the company into disrepute, it triggers a sale of your shares. Okay. So that would have been a simple process. We follow the process. We issue the document. Problem solved. Rather than going down this process that can take 5, 10, 15 years to completely remove someone in that scenario.
Yeah. No, fair point. And, I guess one thing that was running through my head, I was like, if I was a business owner and I was listening to this podcast now and I do want to engage a lawyer, I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll just type out a contract. Why shouldn't they do that?
And you know what? That's one of my big bugbears, I guess, at the moment. And I talk about this a lot. ChatGPT, and there's also companies out there that do provide like legal documents, and you can download them for a small
Online,
fee.
yeah.
The problem with those documents is there are one size fits all, and business is not a one size fits all. They really don't take into account your personal circumstances, your business circumstances, your goals. It's the same as downloading a will off the internet that's designed to just say, in the event of death, everything goes to my partner. Well, that's not how life really works.
Yeah.
And I say, ChatGPT's come a long way. It's really how we use it, but it's not going to take over creation of documents that are bespoke. And these are bespoke documents, and they require some careful thought and input by someone who knows what they're doing and has seen these things play out and knows what the trigger points may be. So things that you haven't thought of. So ChatGPT can't think about those things yet. So I say, yep, great services. And often startups make the mistake of using them because they're trying to save money.
Correct, yeah.
And I guess in a lot of ways, a document is better than no document. But it's really important that you don't rely on that as your business grows. And going back to the example of your business suddenly takes off, you're making money, that's a good point to go back and think, wait, do I have everything in place to protect my business?
Correct, yeah. I think one of our business partners, he always says, cheap is expensive.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So that just always sticks out to me. Like if it's that cheap, but you're covering something so expensive, doesn't cut it. That's
exactly right. And ChatGPT doesn't replace the relationship that you might build with someone. And it might be one tiny thing that they say, and have you thought about this, that prompts a conversation that can save you a big, big problem in the future.
Yeah, that's true. I remember I was actually one of them that a few years ago when I was starting business, I was like, I need a family trust. I jumped online and used one of those templates. and pretty much what happened was after that, when it came down to distributing funds through the family trust, I couldn't do it because the template was wrong.
Yeah,
I couldn't distribute anything to myself, which was redundant. So I ended up having to go pay and fix everything. So it's like cheap.
Which cost you more, right?
Cost me more. cheap was expensive, So yeah, for definitely business owners out there, please don't use ChatGPT. It's great. Like even when I use ChatGPT these days, just to do some basic research, it still comes back with information that I know is wrong, and I'm like, that's just wrong. It doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly right. It's great as a starting point, but it's a starting point. It's not the final document or the final answer. And also, I guess with ChatGPT and the legal templates is to not be afraid to speak to lawyers. Often people have this misconception that I'm going to engage a lawyer and it's going to even to pick up the phone and ask them a question, it's going to cost me hundreds of dollars. Have the conversation and find out what it's going to cost.
Yeah.
A good lawyer will tell you up front, this is how much this is going to cost. And that initial conversation costs you nothing.
Correct.
So find out what your options are before you go down that path of maybe I'll just use ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Not a great starting point.
Yeah. One thing I can think about if people really want to use ChatGPTs, you can ask ChatGPT good questions to ask your commercial lawyer when you go sit down with them.
That's right.
And actually then it actually gives you good prompts, but it doesn't give you the right solution.
That's
It
right.
can give you a good prompts. Okay. Just talking about mergers and acquisitions now, because I know that's the space you love, and it's a growing space because if you think about it, lots of businesses can join together, and people probably should join businesses or join forces where it makes strategic sense. How does that play a part when you're putting agreements in place, or what legal documents should they need, what legal documents should they have to ensure that runs smoothly?
Yeah, so often if we take an example of two businesses are coming together, we're doing a merge. We often see it in the technology space. There's a lot of innovative tech startups that tend to merge together. One of them the one that's merging, they may have a shareholders agreement in place already. If that's the case, the people that are coming into the business need to review that shareholders agreement carefully to make sure that where do they sit in the dynamics of things, particularly around decision making. So if I'm coming into your business and the shareholders agreement is drafted in such a way that I'm not going to have a seat at the table in decision making, that might be fine depending on where I'm sitting in my business or what my goals are. But often that's not the case. And often you're merging because you're joining forces.
Yeah.
In which case you need to really think about that. And it's often a trigger point for businesses to often review their shareholders agreement or have a new one put in place to really reflect all the new parties' interests and really sit down and have a discussion about where the direction of the business is going now. So two companies coming together is a good point for that to happen.
Okay.
Often you might see it where the startup company that you're merging with, maybe they didn't have a shareholders agreement. So great, let's do it now as we're moving in place. So anyone who's acquiring any interest in a business, whether they're acquiring 1%, 50%, 80%, a shareholders agreement is vital at any level.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind, it might be the case that you're entering into a business at that 2% level and they have an existing shareholders agreement. You're not going to have much sway in changing that document, but you should still know what it says and get it reviewed so that you understand what the obligations are, so that you're not going into this blind and you know what can happen with that. I mean, I think it's often the case that minority shareholders, and it's a big thing in the news at the moment, they often get bullied into positions.
Yeah.
And that's due to a lack of knowledge, I think, in a large way, because they don't understand what's going on in the shareholders agreement or what their rights are. And they often come to lawyers again at that situation where something's going wrong. Whereas if they understood along the way, they can perhaps put something in place or speak up about something where they didn't know that they could to really protect themselves.
Yeah, yeah. So with that as well, I was just thinking, with that, if two businesses are coming together, yes, they should have one shareholder agreement, but do they need two commercial lawyers in that regard, or would it be okay? Well, we'll just find one who works for both, because it makes sense in a partnership. One partnership will get one lawyer to help us. But if you're merging, would that be two lawyers or one lawyer, or what does that look like?
Yeah, typically. So the business that is has the shareholders agreement, or the one that you're going into, would have one lawyer. Okay. And if you're going into that business, you would get independent legal advice.
I see.
To make sure that you're getting the right advice and that there's no conflict, really. So I always encourage shareholders as well, like if I'm drafting the shareholders agreement for the company, the individual shareholders may go off and get their own independent legal advice, and that is encouraged. For the reason being, I'm acting in the interests of the company, not necessarily each individual shareholder. So what I put together for the company is in the best interests of the business. Is it in the best interests of the 5% shareholder? Perhaps not. And they should get their own independent legal advice.
Yeah. Perfect. That is very informative, Natalie. Hence why you're a rising star. You definitely know your stuff a lot. So thanks for joining us today. I think just to wrap up in terms of business succession planning, to business owners out there, you definitely want to get something in place, have a will for your business, as Natalie says. And, just ensure your shareholder agreements are up to date and up to scratch. So, Natalie, if people were to get in touch with you as a rising star, what's the best way? How can they reach you?
Yeah, so please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also find me on the Business Depot Legal website. My details are all there. I'm always open for an initial call, initial coffee, Zoom chat, whatever you prefer.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us today. Natalie has been amazing, and I'm sure we should definitely touch on this again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks.